G'day. Getting access to the F1 grid is the holy grail when it comes to Formula One. Is it possible? Of course, look at all these people. But how do they get that coveted sticker? Let me explain. The hour prior to a Formula One race start is so hectic out on the grid. The grid opens at 2 p.m. and that's when all of the mechanics head out there with things like the dry ice, the generators, the cooling units, safety barriers, and everything they need to set a car up for a start. But there are plenty of people out there on the grid who aren't working in Formula One, but they've all managed to get one of these stickers that sits on their lanyard that says Grid Access. These are highly prized, and so few of them get distributed, so it's not easy to get invited onto the grid. And let me tell you, most of these people who aren't working are invited. But prior to all those invited guests being allowed onto the grid, a whole host of things happen. We've already had the crews setting up their grid boxes, which are indicated by these signs on the side of the track. Each team has upwards of 10 mechanics getting ready for that car to arrive at the grid box. Those mechanics have special passes, so they don't need the fluoro sticker that we all need as working media, or you would need if you managed to get access. There's no doubt some of my best pictures come from the grid because we get such great access, and many of those photos wind up in my F1 photo books. You can find them at kimellman.com. There's one for every driver, plus one for every race that I've shot, well, over the last 4 years. If it's a 3 p.m. race start at 2:17, pit lane becomes closed for crossing unless you're a crew member. Prior to that, all of the TV crews are up and down pit lane doing their work. If they haven't crossed pit lane to get onto the grid by 2:17, they have to wait till 2:30 because at 2:20 p.m. that pit lane opens and all the F1 cars, all 20 of them, can leave their garages, do a lap, come back down the pit lane because obviously they can't get onto the grid because there's already so many people out there, and they will do loops until those red lights indicate that pit lane is closed. And while the cars are going down pit lane, only those mechanics can cross pit lane. They then drive around to the back of the grid, which is where I take pictures like this, which was back in Hockenheim 2019, and have it coming towards us. Of course, they're braking well before they get anywhere near us, but it does allow us some sensational photo opportunities. This is the only time we can realistically stand in front of a moving car. While the driver's still sitting in the car, it's being wheeled down the grid by 6 or 7 mechanics, and there's always one at the front, normally the front jackman, who just makes sure that nobody gets hit because there's a lot going on. And if you're not paying attention, it is very easy to get caught up. The driver will get out, he'll chat to his engineer, and then he hightails it to the garage. Now, by this time, there's been a deluge of people coming onto the track. Now, this is the bit that you're probably interested in. Can you be one of those people invited to enter the grid? Well, yes. Who are they? Well, typically, they're celebrities, they're influencers, they're friends of teams or VIPs. Sometimes VIPs are allowed to bring an assistant or a friend as well. And who hands out these stickers? It can be the FIA, it can be F1. Teams are allotted a certain number of grid stickers that they can then distribute to anyone they choose. What about if you're under 18? Yes, I have seen youngsters out there on many occasions. Here's Mariah Carey's son in the car on the grid going back a number of years ago now. And if you are lucky enough to be an influencer or a friend of an influencer and be out on the grid, note that you do need to wear closed-toed shoes. I've seen a number of people turned away, particularly women, who've come in shoes that aren't suitable. Tiffany Cromwell, Valtteri Bottas's girlfriend, once tried to enter the grid with the wrong shoes. She was told no. She went back to Valtteri's garage and got some of his racing boots. Didn't match her outfit at the time, but she got onto the grid. Now you might be thinking, is there a ticket that you can buy that gets you grid access? I've never heard of one. Certainly you can buy tickets that get you access to pit lane, and F1 Garage is a perfect example where you actually sit inside a garage. It could be a team's garage if there was an 11th team, but no, it's full of people with plenty of money enjoying what is the most remarkable spot to watch a race from. And what's in it for Formula One to allow the likes of VIPs and influencers onto the grid? Because it's not a ticket you can buy. Well, the exposure that they get from influencers posting their stories to their audience is huge. One post from the likes of a Cristiano Ronaldo could be worth millions of dollars. Of course, there's a limited number of passes available, so if you're going to get one, you will be very lucky. upfront about that. Otherwise, everyone would be having one and loving it. As a photographer, though, it's tricky for me to work out who's who. For instance, the other day I see Pedro, who is one of the PR gentlemen at Ferrari, and he's escorting a woman with dark hair. I had seen some posters of who the artists were performing at the Bahrain Grand Prix, and I just asked, is that Peggy Gou? I didn't know her from a bar of soap. And it was. So, yeah, I got photos of Peggy. But sometimes we just look for selfie hunters. We look for masses of media clambering on board. We take the photos first, and then we worry about who it was later. When I'm looking for celebrities to shoot on the grid, I often follow Martin Brundle. Martin has the advantage of having a producer in his ear and also somebody on the ground leading him to different celebrities. If I follow Martin, I normally find those celebs. But if we go back to 2 p.m. when the grid's open and the mechanics are coming onto the track, up the front of the grid, Katie and her team are out there laying out the red carpet, putting down all the names of the drivers, where they'll stand, where the celebrities will stand, setting up the trophy perhaps, and the entertainers who'll be looking after that section of the show. The artists performing the national anthem may have even rehearsed the night prior and will be fully cognizant of where they need to stand and be, no doubt, a little bit nervous because there is a huge audience that watches the national anthem, and it's a very important gig. Some of you asking what is the best and worst tracks for grid. Well, when I say worst, Monaco is the tightest, and so much so that normally the drivers will walk back past their cars and out into pit lane. However, Monaco is so tightly packed that the drivers will actually walk forward and go down pit lane from the other direction. On the other hand, tracks like Bahrain and China are very wide, and that means there's plenty of space, so getting around is not that hard. Plus, they're not typically as busy a race in terms of spectators and grid. In essence, those celebrities start coming onto the track just after 2:30 p.m. for a 3 p.m. race start, and they all need to be off just after the national anthem. So realistically, there's only a 17-minute window where you'll be able to spend time on the grid, and it is an absolute madhouse. So many people trying to move about and get a good look at what's going on. You've got Stefano Domenicali, the head of F1. You've got Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the head of FIA, bringing their guests on board. And often they'll have an entourage of 10 people, including security, who forge their way through the media. Another way to get a grid pass is to be a team sponsor. I see lots of sponsors out there. The larger the sponsor, the better chance you've got of getting one of those grid stickers. A couple of interesting things on the grid that you may not know, and I only learnt it last night, was that if a team happens to spill some oil near their car, they can't just clean it up. They have to contact the FIA, who then sends someone around to clean it up. Why can't they clean it up? Because it could be providing them with an advantage. So the FIA has to do that job. Now, there is a countdown provided over the PA so the drivers are back in time for that national anthem. And as you know, recently, Carlos got fined 20,000 euros, 10,000 of which was suspended because he was late making it to the national anthem. It's an important picture opportunity and for TV, so that's why the FIA places such great importance on having everybody in place at the start of the anthem. So the national anthem is finished. All the drivers head back to their grid boxes. Some actually go to the garages for a quick wee, but that's the cue for every invited guest to leave the track, and including us as the media. So when I leave the track as a photographer, typically I will go to the outside of the track, find a hole in the fence, and I'll walk down to the Turn 1 tower and shoot head on. But for two tracks, I actually go down pit lane. One of them is Imola, and that's because the Turn 1 you actually access on the outside. But do you know the other track that requires access via pit lane to Turn 1, not the outside of the track? Abu Dhabi. I've been lucky enough to have grid access for pretty much all of my F1 career, except the first season, because anybody with a permanent pass normally gets access to the grid. But for the first year of shooting, we operate on a race-by-race basis, which means we apply for accreditation for each race, and there's no guarantee you'll get it. And certainly you'd be lucky to get grid access in your first year. Is it possible to sneak onto the track? No way. First you'd have to get into the paddock, which is hell impossible. And then you'd have to get across pit lane and get past 5 to 7 security people whose role is to identify those with the grid stickers and allow them on. And I've seen plenty of people turned away. Certainly if you ever get the chance to get onto the grid, you will think it is one of the greatest things you've ever done. To be that close to the drivers, to the cars, have the fans in the grandstand all wanting to be where you are is something quite special. But if you're not a celebrity, an influencer, a sponsor, someone invited by Formula One, or a friend of any of those people, you might be happy with watching the podium after a race from down below. That is far more attainable. There are certain tickets in Paddock Club that allow you to go into pit lane and watch the podium from below. If you're close enough, you could even end up being showered in champagne. Sometimes when I'm standing out there on the grid before the start of a race, I just kick myself and think, how lucky am I? And if you're lucky enough to be out there and you see me, please say hi and I'll take your photo. Now, before I go, could you please hit the like button? And for those of you unsubscribed, here's your chance to sort that out by pressing the subscribe button. And for a whole lot of other social media content and to go to kimellman.com, these are the sites that you'll need. Thanks for watching. Stay passionate. Intro.